part that probably everybody wants to hear about the sinking of the Titanic. Well, I'm sure that's what everybody wants to hear. So let's get right into this. Right now, we're just going to talk a little bit about the sinking. All right, here goes nothing, guys. At 11:40 p.m., the ship's time, on April 14th, the lookout, Frederick Fleet, in the Crow's Nest, spotted an iceberg immediately ahead of the Titanic, alerted the bridge. The bridge is the control center, the top of the boat, the ship. So he alerted the bridge. First officer William Murdoch, Officer Murdoch, ordered the ship to be steered around the obstacle and engines to be stopped. But it was too late. The starboard side of the Titanic struck the iceberg, creating a series of holes below the water line. So let me just tell you this, guys. When she hit hard. And Andrews talked about how the ship could withstand the compartments being filled up almost 4, but not 5. Because if she hit 5, if the watertight doors were closed and she reached 5, then the ship would sink and she would flounder and she would go to the bottom of the sea. So, okay, so let's get right back into this. So ordered the ship to be steered around the obstacle and the engines to be stopped, but it was too late. The starboard side of the Titanic struck the iceberg, creating a series of holes below the waterline. The hull was not punctured by the iceberg, but rather dented, such as the hull seams buckled and separated, allowing water to seep in. 5 of the ship's watertight compartments were breached. That's what I said. So imagine if they were only 4, maybe the ship would still be able to be afloat. So the watertight compartments were breached. It soon became clear that the ship was doomed, as she could not survive more than 4 compartments being flooded. So more than 4, she cannot survive. Wow, I thought it was 5, but more than 4 seems about right. Titanic begun sinking bow first, head first. That's what that means. The water spilling from compartment to compartment as her angle in the water became steeper. Those aboard Titanic were ill prepared for such an emergency. In accordance with the accepted practices of the time, as the ship were seen as largely unsinkable and lifeboats were intended to transfer passengers to nearby rescue vessels. Titanic only had enough lifeboats to carry about half of those on board. If the ship had carried her full complement of about 3,339 passengers and crew, only about a third could have been accommodated in the lifeboats. And again, when you subsidize or when you put in front comfort, money over safety, it's kind of you're taking a big risk. And I feel like that's what the Titanic had done. They wanted the boat to look lavishly. They wanted people to be more comfortable. As you would know, that didn't work. The crew had not been trained adequately in carrying out an evacuation. Now, I think they did a pretty damn good job. From watching the movies, not only from watching James Cameron film, but from watching the 1958 A Night to Remember Titanic, I think they did a pretty decent job. Now, mind you, back in those days, this was all new. So when the Titanic hit, can you imagine waking up? It's a cold night. You're being woken up. It's very cold outside. And some may have been half asleep, and you being woken up by strangers. I mean, not strangers, but, people that are officers, and they're trying to wake you up. They're trying to tell you to get to the deck. They're trying to tell you to get a life jacket on and get out there. And a lot of these people, they're not used to this. They're not accustomed to this type of thing. So they weren't ready for this, man. They weren't ready for this at all. The crew had not been trained aquatic. I feel a little bit indifferent about it, but hey, the officers did not know how many they could safely put aboard the lifeboats, and launched many of them barely half full. That was true. They launched half of the lifeboats that were half full. They weren't full. They could have fit way more people, and you guys know that watching the movie is. I mean, they didn't have enough reaction time, not enough at all. So here we go. The crew could not, how do you want to say it? The officers did not know how many they could safely put aboard the lifeboats and launch, many of them barely half full. The third-class passengers were largely left to fend for themselves. So they left all the poor people to fend for themselves. Wow. Bogus. Sad but true. Causing many of them to become trapped below decks as the ship filled with water. The women and children first protocol is generally followed when the loading of the lifeboats. Most of the male passengers and crew were left aboard. Excuse me. This is the interesting part. Between 2:10 a.m. and 2:15 a.m., a little over 2.5 hours after Titanic struck the iceberg, her rate of sinking suddenly increased as the boat deck dipped underwater and the sea poured in through opening hatches and grates. As her unsupported stern rose out of the water, exposing the propellers, the ship broke into two main pieces between the second and third funnels due to the immense forces on the Nile. With the bow underwater, everybody's like, what the bow? What is the bow? The bow is the front of the ship. Folks. The bow underwater and air trapped in the stern remained upfloat and buoyant for a few minutes longer, rising to a nearly vertical angle with hundreds of people still clinging to it before foundering at 2:20 a.m. It was long generally believed the ship sank in one piece, but discovered of the wreck many years later revealed that the ship had fully broken in two. All remaining passengers and crew were immersed in lethally cold water with a temperature of 28 degrees Fahrenheit and 2 degrees Celsius. So 28 degrees is below freezing, and that's how you get hypothermia, and that's how you die really fast. But it's true, man. Immersion into freezing water typically causes death within minutes, either from a cardiac arrest, which would be a heart attack, or uncontrollable breathing of water, or cold incapacitation. Not as commonly believed from hypothermia, exactly what I said. And almost all of those in the water died of cardiac arrest or other bodily reactions of freezing water within 15 to 30 minutes. Only 5 of them were helped into the lifeboats. The lifeboats had room for almost 500 people now. When the Titanic went down in the sea, and when the lifeboats were where they were, people were screaming, people were hollering. But now you have that mindset. These people in the lifeboats are saying, "No, let's go back. Let's go get these people." But can you imagine? Do you really want to go back? Do you really want to attempt to go back? So if we did go back, these people would tip over the fucking boats and potentially kill us for trying to help them because they were so drained and they were so cold and they just wanted to get in the boat. So, I mean, that was a rough decision, guys. A rough choice. I don't know. Anyway. So, distress signals were sent by wireless rockets and LAMP, and none of the ships that responded was near enough to reach Titanic before she sank. A radio operator on board the Birma, for instance, estimated that it would be 6 a.m. before the liner could arrive at the scene. Meanwhile, the Californian, which was the last to have been in contact before the collision, saw Titanic flares but failed to assist them around 4 a.m. Yeah, they were literally like 50 miles. Maybe, I don't know if it was more than that, but they were pretty close. You would imagine how close the California was. It was fucking ridiculous. So the R.M.S. Carpathia arrived on the scene in response to the Titanic earlier in distress calls. On about 710 people survived the disaster and were conveyed by the Carpathia to New York, Titanic's original destination, while at last 1,500 people lost their lives. Carpathia's captain described the place as an ice field that had included 20 large bergs measuring up to 200 feet. Holy shit. I didn't know that, man. 20 large bergs. Can you imagine? Can you imagine seeing 100 or even 20 or fucking even 10 icebergs? They're just chilling right there. And you hit one of them. Like, that's it. That's it, guys. So 200 feet. Wow, those are pretty fucking big, man. So high, numerous smaller bergs, as well as ice flows and debris from the Titanic. Passengers described being in the middle of the vast white plain of the ice, studded with icebergs. The area is known as Iceberg Alley. What? Iceberg Alley, guys. That's what the area of where the Titanic sunk. That's fucking ridiculous. So later that day, confirmation came through that the Titanic had been lost, and most of the passengers of her the passengers' crew had died. News attracted crowds of people to the White Star Line's officers in London, New York, Montreal, Southampton, Liverpool, and Belfast. Hit hardest in Southampton, where people suffered great losses from the sinking. 4 out of every 5 crew members came from this town. The Carpathia, the ship that saved some of the passengers from the Titanic, docked at 9:30 on April 18th at New York's Pier 54 and was greeted by some 40,000 people waiting at the quayside in heavy rain. Immediate relief, a form of clothing, transportation to shelters, was provided by the Women's Relief Committee, Travelers Aid Society of New York, and the Council of Jewish Women, among other organizations. Many of the Titanic's surviving passengers did not linger in New York, but headed onwards immediately to relatives' homes. Some of the wealthier survivors chartered private trains to take home, and Pennsylvania Railroad laid on special train free of charge to take survivors to Philadelphia. Titanic's 214 surviving crew members were taken to the Red Star Line steamer SS Lapland that were accommodated in passenger cabins. Man, it's so many things that I've learned today just by reading some of this stuff, that I didn't know, guys. Wow. Oh, wow, listen to this. Fewer than a third of those on board Titanic survived the disaster. Some survivors died shortly afterwards. The injuries and the effects of exposure caused death of several of those brought aboard on the Carpathia. So people were still dying on the Carpathia. The figure shows differences in the survival rates of the different classes aboard the Titanic. Although only 3% of the first class women were lost, 54% of the third class died. The last living survivor, Melvina Dean from England, who had only 9 weeks old, was the youngest. She was the youngest passenger aboard. She died in May 31st, 2009. She was the youngest person on board the Titanic, and she died at 97 years old. So, wow. Number aboard children, first class was 6. The number was saved was a 5. The number aboard was 6. So first class, 1 children died. 89 third class women died. 89 guys. 693 crew died. A total. Wow. 68%. This is ridiculous, man. Anyways, guys, this is amazing to read. I just wanted to go over a little bit about what I didn't go over in the Titanic stuff. If you guys hear me talk a little bit about it, and you hear me talk about the Titanic, but these are just things that that I wanted to touch on, and just things that I missed. But besides that, this is a beautiful, beautiful, beautiful podcast here. We're just touching down. We're getting closer and closer. A couple days out, another less than a week before Christmas. So I hope everybody's doing good. And that's it, man. This has been a wonderful podcast. I want to thank you guys for watching the Titanic Overview 2. What a beautiful way to jump into this holiday. Just remembering all the people that did pass away. Remember the people that were on the Titanic that did make it, that did survive. There's a lot of things that we need to touch on, that we need to be thankful for. You know what I mean? But yeah, we're getting ready for the holidays, guys. We're doing good, and we're gonna upload this so you guys can take a look at it. For people that do want to know more about the Titanic and are interested and want to hear me stutter a little bit, that's okay too. But Merry Christmas, guys. We'll have a Christmas cast coming soon. And I want to thank you guys for joining Vinnie's Talk special Titanic overview, episode 22. This has been a wonderful time here. But until the next time, you guys know what to do. Peace.